This is Monica, my E36 drift car. She started out in life as a 320i equipped with an M50B30, which was enough to get her sideways, but just barely. That's why I spent the last year building her up and swapping in an M54B30. With the right engine in the car, I also decided to tweak the suspension, so she could handle the best she could. And since I last left off with the videos, the car still had an open diff, which would present a problem for drifting. I also had to do a couple of mods to make sure she would be able to take the abuse of hard driving. And after all that was taken care of, after all that building, it was about damn time to do some driving. The first drift day coming up was at the Blagomix Logatec driving center, organized by the people of Racegasmic Drift Polygon. It was going to be the same like last time, except this time I really wanted to drive, so the car had to be ready. First thing to do was weld that diff. Whenever I weld a diff, I always prepare a plate which I shape to fit between the gears, and I even cut little notches for the gear teeth into it to make it easier to weld. This is probably a bit overkill, but I like to be on the safe side. I asked my dad to weld the diff for me because he's got a lot more experience than me. I really didn't want to mess up the weld because it was a pain to get this diff. We had to drive through Austria, through the Alps, in the winter to get it. When the diff was welded, I had to sand down the sealing surface, make a gasket, and thoroughly fish out any pieces of weld spatter that fell in the diff. I then seasoned the diff with some diff oil. To make sure enough was in there, I put just shy of 2 liters in there, and I later emptied out the excess fluid. Everything was torqued to spec, the diff was then installed in the car, and excess fluid was emptied out through the top hole on the diff. Unfortunately, a couple of days later I found out that the diff was leaking oil, which needed to be fixed.
This crush washer, and I didn't replace it because I was a dum-dum. I have to be the fastest man in the world. Now we're gonna tighten it real good.
I replaced the old washer, which was already pretty corroded, with a new one, and I stored the fluid to be put back into the diff later. After another couple of days, I had a good idea to install some additional protection for the diff. It sometimes happens that on E36s, the tabs of the diff cover break if the car is driven too hard or you clutch kick it too often or something like that. That's why I decided to install the Skid Shop differential reinforcement kit. Installation was pretty straightforward. I was happy I didn't have to take the diff off, I just had to remove 4 bolts holding down the cover and 2 holding the diff in the car. The kit also comes with these standoffs for diff bolts so that they can squeeze the plate along with the diff. And you also get longer diff bolts included to compensate for these standoffs. Like always, the link to get this part for yourself is in the description. I then also replaced the crush washer on the fill plug and poured in the fluid from before. Then I had to make sure that everything in the engine bay was nice and secure. I had to fasten down the air filter, some loose wires, relays, and make sure all the bolts in the engine bay are bolted down. Because we were in the middle of a heat wave in summer, I wanted my engine to have a bit more cooling. So I decided to install an oil cooler. The cooler, the oil filter cap, the hose and AN fittings were all provided by Skid Shop. I decided to fit it on the bumper bar because it fits really nicely under the bumper. And there's also enough space for it even with the 90-degree fittings. Though I had to say goodbye to the horn number 1. I drilled holes in the bumper bar and made stencils for tabs which I'll use to fit the cooler. The idea here is to make tabs out of thin sheet metal so that in the event of a light crash, in theory, the tabs should bend backwards and there is no damage done to the cooler. I made the tabs and mounted the oil cooler. Next step was the oil filter cap. It's made up of 2 parts so that you can freely choose which way the lines point. I was informed that I'm going to need to trim the intake manifold, however in my hubris I thought it would still fit. I was promptly put back into my place and trimmed the intake manifold. I wanted to tighten the cap with the filter tightening tool, but there was not enough space around it for the strap, so I just used the rack to give it the maximum juice. When I fitted the upper part of the cap, I needed to make sure that it was pointing in the left direction and I had to watch out for the cheeky little O-ring underneath. When that was all bolted down, I needed to figure out where the lines were gonna go and how long they needed to be. I started on the oil filter side, installed the fittings and routed the pipes. This was my first time working with AN fittings, and you really gotta push them on with the might of Zeus. But the installation is so straightforward that I gotta say I'm a big fan. I will however invest in some AN wrenches and vise attachments because I did damage the anodized paint a little bit. I then cut the hose on the other side and installed the other fittings. With the hoses done, I tightened the fittings to the cap and the cooler with a good amount of juice. I then put some additional oil in the engine and started it for a couple of seconds. Then I turned it off and poured in some more oil. I repeated this process until the engine stopped taking in new oil.
1.7 liters of oil.
With the oil cooler successfully installed, I wanted to test it at a higher oil pressure. But before that, I wanted to put the bumper back on. Because on E36s, the bumper bar and the bumper are held together with clips and are usually removed together, I needed something easier to remove to replace the clips. And these rivet nuts were just perfect. I really love these. Wherever you need a threaded hole, you just put one in, use this tool and bam! There you go. Pretty good stuff. And they help out with iron deficiency as well. And now it's time to do a little testing. There were a couple of things I noticed. Firstly, the car wanted to overheat under load, even though the cooling system looked fine. I later realized that the electric fan just wasn't powerful enough to keep the radiator cool for low speed drifting. That's why I went back to the old reliable. No fan shroud though, because the engine sits a bit higher than stock due to the skid shop engine mounts, and so the OEM one doesn't fit. So I guess I'll just have to watch my fingers. Fittings on the oil filter cap were also leaking a little bit, so I just gave them more juice. And with the viscous fan back in the car, the overheating issue was solved. The last thing to take care of were wheels and tires. Because I now had more power at my disposal, I could go for larger wheels. So I got these 17-inch Opel Insignia Steelies that are pretty common with drift BMWs. I will probably get them widened eventually, but for now I just got the center bore increased so that they fit the E36. I then did the basic bull check and prepared the burner tires. And with that, the car was ready to hit the track.
Crispy.
I was pretty happy that Adams decided to help me out on the day of the event. When we got there, we unloaded the car and set up our pit area. Then it was time to work on the car a little bit. Remember when I said that the car was ready for the track? Well, I was using an advanced technique called lying. The electric windows didn't work, and if you paid attention before, we were in the middle of a heat wave, so I really needed these fixed. The reason I didn't do it at home was because I ran out of time and I thought that at worst I could just jump the electric window motor by putting some voltage directly to the pins of the connector. But that didn't work, so I had to hit the track with my window still up. Which lasted for exactly 2 runs before I was back in the pits, sweaty and angry, removing the lifting mechanism so that the window would just be permanently down. And that finally solved the issue. Meanwhile, I attended my first driver's briefing as a driver, so I can tick that off the bucket list, and we were taken around the track for a sighting lap. Logatec is always interesting to drive. It usually has a slow and a fast section, and the slow section has this bridge where you can either go under or over. This was the layout for the day. I was worried that if I messed up my initiation at the start, I might hit one of these mounts. Therefore, I just initiated with the handbrake before going under the bridge. After the sighting lap, I took another run or two going slowly, just testing the waters, drifting only certain sections and then slowly trying to link it all up. At this point, it was about 2 years since I last did any proper drifting, so I was super rusty and spun out a bunch. But by the end of the day, I managed to put together a run or two. So now that I have tried drifting the car for real, what do I think about it? Oh boy, does this thing rip! Since I don't have much experience or any other benchmark to compare, I can just tell you that to me, she feels great. Handling is good, power is awesome. Beside the windows, the only other issue was skill related, which is why I've only gone through 2 or 3 sets of burners. She still has more to give though. I just need to learn to drive her properly and keep her in the power band so that I'll be able to harness her full potential. The event as a whole was successful as well. There were more cars here than last time and there weren't any major crashes. So pretty good stuff all around. I'm also super thankful to Adams for helping me out. It would have been a real struggle if I was alone. One thing I did notice was there was some rubbing happening on the front and the rear. On the rear it only happened when I installed wheels with lower offsets, and on the front the wheel was hitting the fender at full bump and high steering angles. The tires I picked up had a little too big of a sidewall. To stop rubbing here I either needed some stiffer springs, which I didn't want to, or longer bump stops. Until next time I just raised the car for a centimeter and hoped for the best. The next time was a trip to the Racegasmic Drift polygon. Since Eric was also at the polygon that weekend, he wanted to try out my car to see how she handles. So of course I let him take her out for a spin. Afterwards, he said that the setup is, and I quote, not that bad. Which made me pretty happy, as it means that my work didn't go to waste. You know what didn't make me happy though? What happened later.
What happened, Mr. Drifter?
What happened here was a so-called oopsie poopsie. A foxy woxy, if you will. Basically, I came out of this part probably with a bit too much speed, started straightening out, panicked, and instead of pulling the handbrake, I slammed the brakes and bulldozed off track into the fence. I also hit a tire which broke my oil cooler, and when I saw that, I immediately turned off the car. Thanks to these legends, my car was pushed off track where I could assess the damage. Looks like the tabs did work, but unfortunately on one side the cooler leaned against the radiator guard and proceeded to go, covering pretty much my entire engine bay in oil. Because I didn't want to leave oil leaks all over, I decided to remove the oil cooler and lift up the hoses. With that taken care of, I walked up to Eric and right then and there ordered a new cooler. Because Eric is such a legend, he managed to get me a new one in just a couple of days. But before I installed it, I wanted to clean up the engine bay. And when I took the bumper off, I realized that the fan mounting was off and that the fan itself didn't work.
Ooh, gnarly.
I fixed the mounting by drift stitching the plastic fan shroud that got damaged, and after some troubleshooting I realized the reason the fan was not working was because of a blown fuse, and the fuse blew because of this. I covered up the exposed parts of the wires and put a new fuse in. I also cleaned up any remaining oil as much as I could. I then straightened the tabs and installed a new oil cooler. Yes, I know, doing the same thing all over again, the definition of insanity. Although, if I never crash again, I won't have this problem. But in all seriousness, I intend on fixing it in the off-season. I made sure to tighten the fitting on the oil cooler with maximum juice and top off the engine with oil. And because the front bumper also took a beating, I had to stitch it up. With all that taken care of, she was once again ready to hit the track. The next drift day was once again at the Racegasmic Drift polygon, and Adams offered up to help. We needed to go fill up the canisters with fuel, which presented a perfect opportunity for Adams to flex his new whip.
Show them the beauty. The pinnacle of French engineering. Give them the... Gas given. Woo! Yeah, light.
Light as fuck.
Carbon fiber. Carbon fiber. The beta.
This
shifter.
one's way better.
Yeah. For drift machine.
Because the windows still weren't fixed at this point, some precautions needed to be taken to prevent the rainwater from collecting in the car. When we got there, we unloaded all the tires, filled up the car, started it, warmed it up, and I planned approximately what I wanted to work on that day. After that, it was time to sand it. I was starting to see some improvements in my driving, but unfortunately the car had a differential with a ratio of 2.93 to 1, which makes first gear a little too short and second a little too long here. So a lot of the times either the engine bogged down or I was hitting the rev limiter a bit too much. Still, I was getting more and more used to the car, got more comfortable driving it, and I could see the work put in was paying off. I even managed to burn through more tires this time. To thank Adams for all the help he's provided, I let him drive Monica a little bit to try and pull off some donuts.
Okay, super.
Towards the end of the season, the people from Racegasmic Drift Polygon organized one last drift day at Blagomix Logatec. This was gonna be a big one, and I obviously wanted to go. I also wanted to lower my car back that centimeter I lifted it before, so I just hammered the rear arches a bit so that I would no longer get any rubbing. For the front, I just decided to say fuck it and add it to the list for the off season. I went through my usual preparation procedure to make sure everything is in good shape. I prepped the burner tires, do a thorough bolt check, I checked the engine mounting, every suspension bolt, all the fuel, water and oil lines, all the fluids. Then I pack my stuff, load the car and head off. This time I got a helping hand from Jure, and also some of his friends showed up to help me with tire changes and other stuff. And my old buddy Jost came in clutch with his camera to provide some nice b-roll for you. After we unloaded all the wheels and set up the pit area, we had to attend the driver's briefing where we were informed about today's layout. It looked like this. The first part was a bit different than last time because we were only going under the bridge this time, and the second part was pretty similar to last time. Then we were let out on track for a sighting lap, and after that it was officially time to send it. The turnout was incredible. I think it was the highest of this year. Beside your everyday E30, E36 and E46 chassis, there were also some more exotic cars, like this awesome fully built 350. And if you think that VQ sounds gnarly, listen to this. That's an Alfa Romeo 75 with a V6 and a freaking side pipe. This thing is a screamer. You might be wondering, where's my car? Well, after a couple of runs, I ran into some issues. The 3D printed gas pedal holder from a couple of videos back finally decided to give in. It was already broken from when my dad tried to keep it in place by screwing some self-tappers through it, which obviously broke the print, but it held together up until now. At first I tried to go with more self-tappers, but the plastic wasn't having it and just broke more. Luckily the top part, which was bolted down, still provided enough support, so I just zip tied the pedal to the holder and that did the job. It was still a bit loose, but I could at least fully press the gas pedal. With that fixed, it was again time to hit the track. It was a lot better this time. My driving had improved and I had a lot more fun. The weather was better this time as well. We weren't in the hottest part of the year, so the temperatures were a lot more manageable. However, by the end the clouds were already edging rain. Overall, a really fun event to finish off the season. The season as a whole was awesome. I had a lot of fun, I learned a lot driving wise and about how to prepare and take precautions so that there are no, well, mostly no problems on track. I'd say I got the car to about where I wanted it at the beginning of the season, but I did learn what needs to be improved or simplified to make everything a bit better. Some quality of life changes, if you will. With the off-season starting, it's time to get back to the workshop and start working on the car, so that she'll be ready for the next season. And of course, I'll keep you posted on all the developments. For now, I'd like to thank you all for watching, I hope you enjoyed the video, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!